Hello everyone, I am Sidi from Ben-Gurion University of the Negev in Israel. I'll present my talk Redundancy-Weighting the PDB for detailed secondary structure prediction with applications in estimation of protein model accuracy. First, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to present our study. This talk presents two themes: embracing the PDB redundancy instead of fighting it, and that the prediction of detailed secondary structure is both feasible and useful. Let me introduce these concepts. We, the community of computational structural biologists, are lucky to have a major resource, the PDB, which includes practically all available structural data. Inevitably, the PDB is redundant and biased. That is, some protein families and even specific proteins are overrepresented in the data. The common approach to deal with biases in the PDB is to cluster the structures by sequence similarity and use non-redundant subsets of the data. This practice of choosing cluster representatives loses about 75% of the available data and all the diversity in structures inside clusters. We advocate a different approach called redundancy weighting that uses all the data, avoid biases by weighting, and capture the subtle variations within the clusters. Similar approach was already used by Miyazawa and Jerningen, and later in our group in the work of Yanover et al. Both studies were in the context of knowledge-based potentials. Here, we apply the redundancy weighting approach to the problem of secondary structure prediction and offer our datasets to the community. Just a reminder, secondary structure prediction is the mapping of each residue in the protein sequence to a secondary structure class. It is an important subtask of protein structure prediction and plays a vital role in many of its aspects. So, how many classes should we predict? Early methods predicted 3 classes, and today, with the increase in structural data, most methods predict the 8 classes of DSSP. But can we predict more refined classes? In 2003, Karchin and co-workers suggested a new classification that divides the E-class into 6 subclasses, considering the strand orientation and position. This classification makes much sense, yet to the best of our knowledge, it has been abandoned for quite a few years. Our secondary aim is to improve the information content of secondary structure prediction with this classification. We start with redundancy weighting. This work considers the PDB as a graph. The nodes are chains, and the edges represent sequence similarity. We associate each residue with a weight. Here's a chain in red that has 3 neighbors. We align their sequences and assign each residue a weight inversely to the number of identities. For example, the residue R appears 2 times in the alignments, and thus its weight is 1/3. For performance estimation, we partition the graph to 3 independent parts: training, validation, and test. To this end, we removed connecting chains. To be compatible with other studies, in testing the performance, we choose non-redundant subsets of the test and validation. So we have non-redundant test set, non-redundant validation set, and for the training, we have a redundant training set and its non-redundant subset that consists of cluster representatives. We repeated this process 3 times. The redundant training sets are approximately 5 times larger than the non-redundant ones. We used this data to train and test 6 different neural network architectures, which were introduced by Dror et al. And made publicly available. These models combine LSTMs, GRUs, and 1D convolutions with various window sizes. They also suggested an average ensemble model, which we implemented. The table presents the performance on the non-redundant test set of trained deep learning models for secondary structure prediction of 8 and 13 classes. on one of the partitions. The performance is measured by Q measure and matrix correlation coefficient. NR, R, and RW depict the training sets, non-redundant, redundant, and redundancy weighting, respectively. We emphasize the best performance for each model and measure in bold font. In all cases, these are the models trained on the redundancy-weighted dataset. Overall, and for each column, the average ensemble model is the best performing one. Finally, note that the models trained on the redundant datasets have about the same performance as the non-redundant ones. This is interesting considering the efforts we take to alleviate redundancy. Next, we incorporated STR2 predictions into our EMA method, Meshisco. Meshisco, like almost any other EMA method, uses features derived from secondary structure prediction. We tested its performance with and without STR2-based features and compared the results. This table shows various per-target median performance measures of Meshisco on the hard targets of CASP13. The first line depicts Meshisco trained with STR2-derived feature, and the second line with DSSP-derived feature. We can see that using STR2 predictions is highly useful for hard targets. For example, this column depicts the Pearson correlation between the actual quality and the score, and shows almost 5% improvement. When we look on all CASP13 targets, including the easy targets, we see a similar yet less pronounced trend. This makes sense, as for easy targets, when the decoy disagrees with the prediction, it is often the decoy which is right. To summarize, most importantly, we showed that training on redundancy-weighted datasets improves the performances of secondary structure prediction methods. We believe that this is also true for other aspects in computational structural biology. Additionally, we revived the STR2 alphabet for secondary structure prediction and showed it can be useful for estimation of protein model accuracy. Finally, our easy-to-use JSON datasets are publicly available, and we hope they will encourage more efforts in this direction. Thank you for listening. I would like to thank my supervisors, to the CASP participants for providing their decoys, and to Ido and Itzik for their deep learning models. I would be happy to answer your questions.